Hi, I'm James from Chaosium. I sat down with Matt Ryan. Matt is a cartographer for Chaosium. He is the one behind a lot of the best maps that Chaosium puts out. In this interview, he shares details of what his workday is like being a cartographer. He shares some advice on how you can make the best maps, and he talks about what makes a TTRPG map good in general and what he thinks is the best usage of them. I'll jump across to the interview in just a moment, but first, please remember to subscribe, and thanks for watching.
I'm Matt Ryan. I'm the graphic designer for Chaosium. I specialize in cartography, although I do other graphic elements for the books. I'm lucky enough to work across lines. I work on the Call of Cthulhu line. I work on the RuneQuest and Pendragon line.
So give us a little bit of a sense of what your day-to-day looks like. When you're working, what do you do?
When I'm working, I'm usually at the end of the pipeline. So I'll get I slip into television terms a lot because I have a long career in television prior to this. So I'll get a shot list, which is really kind of it's the necessary parts. So with cartography, it'll be the necessary bits that I need to draw. And I kind of break that up into big, little, for example, right now I'm working on the Arkham books. So I'll break it up into floor plans on the one side and bigger neighborhood overhead 2D maps on the other side. And my day is I drive my wife to work, and then I sit down with a cup of coffee and I draw, which is all 80% on the computer. And then I take a break for lunch and I walk the dog, and then I return. And often I will have a Chaosium meeting right around lunchtime. And then I will draw until dinner time, and then I'll go pick my wife up from work, and then we'll have dinner and walk the dog again.
So cartography in TTRPGs is a massive part, obviously, of so many books. What brought you into that field of TTRPG creation specifically? Have you always loved cartography in TTRPGs?
I've always liked maps, especially fantasy maps or maps for things within the fantasy field, if you know what I mean. When I was younger, I was much more interested in a book that started with a map than a book that didn't start with a map. And the early RPG maps were odd. That's a good word to put it. Some of them were brilliant. A lot of them were a little goofy. But I've always sort of had my eye on them, and I've always had my eye on art, especially graphic art or commercial art. I grew up reading graphic novels and European graphic novels in translation. So I've always had an eye towards that. And then always in games, I played a lot of games, you will come to parts where you need a map. So I would draw a map. I got fairly comfortable just drawing maps for my friends. And then I did some professional writing here off on the side. And then when other people saw that I could draw maps, they said, "You want to draw maps?"
So I want to ask you a little bit more about how you came to start working for Chaosium, things like that. But first of all, I have a few more questions about your working process, I suppose. You mentioned that you were creatively inspired by a lot of maps. Are there any TTRPG maps or just general, cool maps that have stuck in your head since you were a kid? Is there one go-to that you can think of from a particular product?
Yes. I'm an old guy. So there's that great map of Greyhawk that came out that was just spectacular. And it was spectacular in its scope and simplicity. It wasn't really artistic in that the individual components of any of it weren't anything to knock you over, but the size of it was fantastic. The color was fantastic. And the amount of effort spent on a tabletop role-playing game was incredible. That was really cool. I mean, that set a bar in the early games. And then as things went on, not to dip into old AD&D stuff, but the Ravenloft map, all right, by Diesel was just the first time that we really got a solid ISO map. It did more than just tell you where the bathrooms were in the building. It gave you a sense of how it was put together. So as a group would to move through it, you really got a spatial sense of what could happen.
So what makes a TTRPG map good, in your opinion?
A lot of people ask me this question. I give them all different answers. That's not true. A good map does exactly what it's supposed to do and nothing more. That, I think, is my answer. A map should be pretty. A great map invokes a sense of the game, but a map has to do something. They're informational tools. So they have to either show you where the bathrooms are in a building. That's probably not what you're interested in, but they need to show you the different components of the thing, or show you something else about it. Maybe it's a map that changes through time, or it's a place that changes through time, and we need to see that. Many, many things we can actually infer. A lot of us have looked at enough maps. So if we don't see a compass, we know that north is at the top. Depending on what the map is, we can almost think of a scale. If I just gave you a floor plan, you would sort of understand a scale of it.
I think it's really interesting that you have mentioned that the things you like about maps are that they fit well within a creative project. You know, they do exactly what they meant to do. They're supported by other things. And you alluded earlier to your work in the film industry. I imagine that there's some relatedness there. Can you tell us about your sort of career pathway?
My career pathway. I started as a writer, but was not very good at it. And to credit to all writers, I think it's very hard to be a good writer. It takes a lot of dedication and a lot of effort. I got into the film industry just because I sort of knew people. So I had a whole career in broadcast television and in television commercial productions. And back in the analog day. And then I transitioned into the digital video editing. And the digital video editing was really powerful. The things that you can do, you're going to edit this into some kind of a watchable piece, but the things you can do with digital editing are fantastic. So when I started to explore professional cartography, I started to really take a deep dive into Adobe Illustrator and Adobe Photoshop to really see what those things could do. And SketchUp. I use a lot of SketchUp for 3D modeling. If I don't understand what a map is supposed to do, I'll build it. I'll model the building to which often I will then use as a reference, but to really just sort of understand it. The digital video editing is so powerful. It's so powerful that there are all these handles that you can leave in it. So if things have to change, and inevitably in video production, things change. The client wants things changed. It's easy enough to go back into it, no matter how deep the layers are, and change things. So I've incorporated that into my map process. My Illustrator and Photoshop maps have many, many, many layers, and they have many layers that I don't flatten until the very end because I want to go back in there and change things. And I never know what needs to be changed. I work with very creative people and who are, they're better than I am. And I mean that in all sincerity, not trying to put me down or anybody down. They've got a really good eye. So when they want something changed, I want to be able to do that. And I don't want to have to go back from scratch, and I don't want to kill myself because they asked for what is kind of an easy change, maybe.
I hear what you said about SketchUp. Can you confirm or deny Chaosium filtered down legend that somewhere there exists an entire 3D render of cities that you've built just to make sure that you've got all the details?
It's a long story. When Mike Mason and I first started to talk about Arkham, and he started to tell me what he needed for it, the various neighborhood maps and things, I immediately saw that as an isometric map with a lot of roof lines and a lot of perspective. And I thought, how am I going to get that right? That's going to be a lot of straight edges and a lot of eraser marks. I have several friends that are in the comic book industry. And one of them told me about some guy that modeled Manhattan in SketchUp for Spider-Man artists. so that they could get, yes, so that they could get the perspective right. So I thought, well, why don't I just model Arkham? Be simple, right? So I spent a couple months modeling Arkham, and I have a total model of Arkham that I would show to Mike and show to a couple other people throughout the thing to make sure that I wasn't way off field. And then I built, well, I based all the 2D maps on it. I based all of the 3D neighborhood maps on it. I can confirm that.
That is an incredible amount of work. My God, it's amazing. So
it's funny. Well, but it's funny with lots of things. When it comes to us as the consumer, we just see the tip of the iceberg. We see the very end result with art and with cartography, with music. We just see that finished piece that somebody or a group of people have spent thousands of hours on. And I don't think I've spent thousands of hours on Arkham, but I've spent hundreds of hours.
So you've worked for a long time, as you mentioned, in all kinds of commercial television, that sort of stuff. You've had a lot of experience with the full scope of producing work. When you think about TTRPGs and TTRPG cartography specifically in the modern context, what don't you like? What do you not think works well? And I'm not trying to ask you to attack any particular artists or designers. There's a lot of reasons that things get done the way they get done. But are there any trends that you don't particularly enjoy?
There's a current trend to be very detailed with top-down 2D views. And you see it with a lot of cartographers, and you see it a lot now with the new wave of VTT RPG maps that are coming out and that we're going to be doing, and they're nice and they are professionally done, and I would never knock anybody's talent who put something like that together. They're very nice. There's a lot of detail. Sometimes when I look at a piece, a map, or a piece of art, if there's a lot of detail, I don't know where to look. And it's a lot of information for my brain to start to understand. I think part of the process, or a component of a skilled creator is directing the eye. And I like a more stylized approach. The poster maps of 1920s and early 1930s Germany, the Weimar Republic, for example, are really stylized. They're just these 2 or 3 color things that really bring an impact to the film or to the piece that they're trying to produce. And it would be interesting to try to do something like that with cartography. One of the nice things about the Arkham book that we're doing right now is there are many, many maps that are all sort of based on Arkham. And some of the maps are maybe just the trolley maps or something, or maybe a regional map. And I've been able to work on those with a limited palette and not put all of the detail that you find on the giant map that we're providing, but just the specific information with maybe just a 5-color palette or something. That's what I really like. I really like pinpoint precision and manipulating the viewer, if I can say that. But pointing out, I mean, a good map does 1 or 2 things. So let those 1 or 2 things do them strongly, if that's a way to say it.
I love the clarification of exactly what you like to do with TTRPG maps. I know that a lot of creatives have areas that, in the same way that you can have some stylistic stuff that you don't necessarily like, you have some areas that you go too deep on. Do you think there's an area of cartography that if nobody pulled you back from doing it, you'd go way too deep because you love specifically focusing on X, Y, or Z?
I do like to explore digital tools, and the way that SketchUp and Illustrator especially can talk to each other is really fascinating. And the things that I can build in SketchUp and then bring into Illustrator and then play with Illustrator and then bring into Photoshop are really neat. And sometimes a line editor that will rename nameless, I think would prefer me to do a simple floor plan. And I do, but I also would like to see what that building looks like from the outside. And if we're going to look at it from the outside, then we might as well model it. And if we're going to model it, I mean, we might as well figure it out. They say the devil is in the details, and real precision work is in the details. A difficulty for me is to do something quick and dirty. I can unless somebody pulls me by the collar, I can really get lost in the details.
So as a final question, you've given us so much great information. There are a lot of people out there who make their own maps, who have experience working in cartography, and who might be looking towards TTRPG cartography production as a serious career path. Could you give those people any kind of general advice, general guidance?
I can. When I started to muck about with maps, I watched a lot of tutorials on YouTube, and I would specifically watch a beginning tutorial for a specific tool, so I know what parts of the tool were called. So I actually would take pay courses just for a first couple sessions to learn what the different ribbons and toolbars were called in Illustrator and SketchUp and Photoshop. Those are the tools that I primarily use. And once I know what those tools are called, I knew how to search for them. So I could say, how do I do this, or how do I do that? It gave me a vocabulary. I also played a lot of games with my friends, and I used my maps for those games, because for me, drawing for friends both makes me responsible and takes some of the pressure off from it. I can say, this, it doesn't have to be Rembrandt perfect, and none of my work is. But this doesn't have to be awesome. This is just for Friday night. And once I could kind of break through that perfection veil, then it really freed up the creative spirit. I also would find cartographers online, and if I could find an email, I would send them an email and ask if they would meet with me in Zoom for a little bit. Professional cartographers, and all of them said yes. So I would just sit with somebody and I would say, can you show me? I would be familiar with their work, and I would say, can you show me how you do such and such? And every one of them did. So just as a fellow cartographer, if somebody were to email me, matt@chaosium.com, I would try to find some time to spend with them. It's cool. Drawing maps is cool. Playing our games is great. And it just makes everything better.